Watching Kyle's unboxing videos again?
Yeah, he always finds the coolest... No way! A robot dog? Gotta ask where he got it.
Or use your Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. Just draw a circle around the dog on your screen, and it shows you where to buy it right in the app.
Whoa, I just learned a new trick. And that for once, I beat Kyle to the next big thing.
Circle it, find it with the new Galaxy S24 Ultra and circle the search with Google. Get yours now at Samsung.com. Internet connection required. Results may vary based on visuals.
Hi there, Duke fans. Welcome to episode 381 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. I am your host this week. I'm Jason Evans. If I sound a little different than usual, I'm a little congested. You can probably guess the reason why. Yes, I have COVID. It's not bad. It's not a big deal. But boy, yesterday was a terrible day for me because I found out I had COVID and the Blue Devils lost to Florida State. We're going to be recapping all of that. Also looking ahead to the game this weekend against the Syracuse Orange men. And to do that with me is Donald Wine. Sam Klein can't make it today, Donald. So it's just you and me carrying the weight, huh, buddy?
Yeah, and first off, hopefully you're doing okay. You sound a little bit better than you did the other day when we were talking. But I know this is just something we have to deal with it. So I'm glad that you're looking okay. I know the listeners can't see that, but you don't look worse for wear. So you got that going for you.
Thank you very much, sir. Yes, thank you. It's kind of you to say I look good. I don't think I really do, but it's fine. All right, so let's get to the recap of the game last night against Florida State that the Blue Devils lost. Donald, we start the way we always do. Let's go ahead and give our headlines, and I'll let you go first.
Yeah, mine's very simple. Frustrating night in Tallahassee as Seminoles outlast Duke in overtime.
So I had terrible in Tally. Duke forgets who it is in Florida State loss. And I think that was a lot of the story of the game. We will get to the problems, and there are many of them. But we always try to put a positive spin on things, so we will begin with the good. Donald, give me your first good thing that you saw in this basketball contest.
Okay, well, let's start in the first half, because I think in the first half we shot very well from three, which is something that we haven't done in previous games, at least to this point. I think coming out and having those threes was able to stretch out Florida State's defense quite a bit. And I know it led to some other issues that we had on the inside, but I think getting the confidence from our guards was something we talked about in the preview. And I'm glad that we were able to get that early in the form of threes.
Yeah, we did shoot well from three in the first half. It didn't carry over really to the second half. We weren't terrible from three in the second half, but not great. But my first good thing I wanted to point out was someone that Coach K talked about in the post-game press conference. Both Donald and I were on the post-game press conference that Coach K had and several players had. And we heard Coach K praising Jeremy Roach. I thought Jeremy Roach ran the offense really effectively after Trevor Keels went down. Jeremy only had 6 points in this game, but he had 6 assists and just 1 turnover on a day when Duke was really struggling to hold on to the ball. Coach K said he thought that Roach had played one of his best games at Duke. He praised him for being really strong with the ball. And I thought, the only way Duke got back in this contest, and Duke was out of this game for much of the second half, the way we got back was by sharing the ball, by finding better shots. And Jeremy Roach was a huge key in that.
Yeah, and I thought he did very well down the stretch and in overtime too, because again, when a player goes down, no matter what player it is, right? If it's good, bad, important, semi-important, or whatever, you have to adjust. And to do that when you see your teammate fall is very hard to do. I've had to do that in sports, and everyone who's done it does not like to go through it. We always say, yeah, next man up, but that's not something that you want to do. Jeremy Roach, after, being on the bench and accepting his new role of coming off of the bench, is now thrust back into that role where he has to not only be on the floor, but command and lead the offense. And I thought he did that very well under duress. And Florida State had to adjust to find him, but Jeremy Roach was able to find guys, like you said, 6 assists on the night. I thought he was very well at distributing the basketball, which we did not do well as a team. But I think him focusing on that was able to get guys open like Paul Bancaro, or otherwise, we like to talk about the hockey assists. he also had a couple of those where he was able to swing it to a guy who was able to find the open man because his passing lane wasn't there. He was able to find the passing lane that was open, and that led to shots too.
Yeah, and as long as we're praising individuals in the good section, I'm going to talk about Paolo Banchero for a second. And we will get to how he played and how Duke used him in much of the rest of the game. But in the final 5 minutes, Paolo took over, and it was really something to behold. So Duke had 7 possessions in the final 5 minutes. Paolo scored or assisted on 6 of those 7 possessions. And part of it was, by the way, he had 7 assists. He almost had a triple-double in this game. I mean, that's how great Paolo was.
A sneaky triple-double.
Which is crazy considering that there was a 15-minute stretch in the second half where he did nothing. But I'm going to get to that later on. I want to talk about when he was doing something because he was really great. And by the way, like I said, we were on the post game, the two of us, and you asked Paolo specifically about the final couple minutes when the Florida State defense was really focusing on him, and he found a way to get his teammates involved, specifically Mark Williams. I want to play now that question that you had for Paolo about finding Mark Williams and Paolo's response.
Hey, Paolo, in that last 5 minutes, you took over on the offensive end, but it wasn't just your scoring. You were also finding Mark Williams quite a bit inside. What did you see in that last few minutes that presented that opportunity for you to also get Mark Williams involved in the game?
Yeah, just, every time I had the ball, the other 4 defenders were all kind of looking at me and kind of playing, off their man, loading up. So the Mark's man was up the lane, kind of just paying attention, focusing on, making sure I can't drive. So Mark, he's a big target. So it was an easy pass over the top, and I know I can throw it up there, and Mark's going to go get it.
Donald, I'll tell you, the reason I really like that question and the reason I liked what Paolo had to say was he identified the fact that the Florida State defense was gravitating toward him and that he was able to use that and take advantage of that and find Mark Williams for those easy dunks. And it's just so important for us to hear that these guys are figuring out ways of taking advantage of what the other team is presenting them with.
Yeah, and honestly, this is a foreshadowing for what we're going to see on Saturday against Syracuse. But when guys are coming at your best player, to be able to find the open man wherever they are on the floor is important. And I thought it was very interesting that Florida State was sending their big men at Paolo Banchero, and sending their big men at Paolo Banchero left one guy open, Mark Williams, and a lot of over the top where he either was able to alley-oop, dunk, grab it and dunk it, or come down with it and then go back up strong for a dunk. I thought was very, very key. It, again, like you said, it kept other guys involved, and it kept Florida State on their toes in the last 5 minutes of regulation, where we went on a 12-4 run, as you said, mainly engineered by Paolo to get back into the game and force overtime. So, and really at the end of the game, we had a chance to win it. We had a chance to have a defensive stop and win it.
We had the lead in the final minute in both overtime and regulation.
In both overtimes. Yeah, both overtime and regulation, and was not able to just close it out, which we'll talk about that. But I think, honestly, Paolo not relying on just the scoring was very important, because when someone takes over, we always talk about the scoring part. But he was also able to get guys involved in the game, again, namely Mark Williams, who was just sitting there, ready to catch balls at a certain point. That is what you need to see from your best player, is not just to hero ball is a bad way of describing it, but ISO allows him to create, and create doesn't necessarily just mean score.
Yeah. So I've got one more thing I want to touch on in the good, and that is Duke being creative and finding a way to give ourselves a chance. I'm talking specifically about the zone defense. There's a reality, which is that unless you truly have unbridled optimism and never think things are going bad, there was, in the final 7 or so minutes of this game, about 7 minutes out or so, I thought Duke was going to lose. I didn't think we were going to find a way to get back into this contest. We were being outplayed by Florida State in pretty much every phase of the game. And it was frankly miraculous that Duke was as close as they were. And then Duke went zone. And Coach K in the postgame said that we did it because we wanted to give ourselves a little bit of a rest on defense, that the team was feeling a little bit tired. And Coach K wanted to change things up and change the momentum, perhaps slow them down and change the momentum of the game a little bit. And it really worked. And I especially think it's going to be interesting to see whether we play a little more zone when Trevor Keels is out. Now, look, we don't, as we record this, we don't know the situation with Trevor Keels. And I'm going, sideways here for a brief moment. Obviously, losing Trevor Keels was a terrible blow to the team. I hope it is not a long-term thing. Coach K said it is a calf, not a knee, not an ankle. Knees and ankles are things that can take you out for a long period of time. There are certain types of calf injuries that can be really long-term, but for the most part, muscular injuries like that tend to heal a little bit quicker. I don't know if we're going to have Trevor Keels for Syracuse. I think there's, just based on what I saw and what we've heard, probably a good chance that we have him at least back next week. But going back to where I was talking originally, Duke went zone when Trevor Keels went down. And I think that's partially because Trevor is a great man-to-man defender. Really great at matching up on his man. Whereas Jeremy Roach, who replaced him, maybe a little better in a zone situation. I thought Duke played excellent zone defense. And Donald, I don't know if you want to get into the discussion of it. It's sort of interesting that Duke went zone. Florida State was utterly flummoxed, couldn't score. And then the final possession of the game, I think because we wanted to trick them a little bit, we went back to the man-to-man and they scored. It was a really difficult shot. Full credit to Raekwon Evans. That's a hell of a difficult shot he made. But this Duke team showed they can play good zone defense, and that could be an important thing to have in our bag, down the line. And again, the fact that the Coach K and this team was creative and figured out a way to give themselves a chance in a game when, frankly, most people thought they had no chance is a real testament to them.
Yeah, and Wendell Moore was the other player on the press conference along with Paolo Banchero. We didn't get a chance to get his audio, but he had a question that basically directed right at the zone and said, I asked him, is this something that they kind of have in their back pocket and, something that they're able to rely on down the stretch, or was this just something that they went to when Keels went down? And he said, no, this is something that they have in their back pocket. They don't mind using it, and they're able to do it from time to time. But I will say, Jason, about the zone and just those last 7 minutes when Keels went down, you mentioned that at that point, a lot of people, including yourself, were probably saying, well, this game is done. We don't have an answer for this. I want to credit the team for, playing hard to the end. They had a chance to win it. They were ahead at the last minute of regulation, ahead in the last minute of overtime. Every single time it looked like they were out, someone would engineer a run and they were able to catch up and briefly take the lead. That Evans shot to force overtime, I think I was talking with you about it last night. He went up over Paolo Banchero and Mark Williams. Mark Williams' hand was probably 13 feet in the air and the ball went 14 feet. If that's a normal shot, Mark Williams is slamming that into the nether regions and we walk out of there with a victory. It just so happens that the ball went just over his grasp, bounced at the right angle, and was an incredibly good shot to force overtime. So I don't fault this team for how they played in terms of effort. They gave everything they had. When a guy goes down, it's hard to respond the way they did. And I credit them for being able to respond with a little bit of gusto to try and force overtime and really have two shots to win that basketball game.
Yeah. And I think this is the place where we should probably get into the bad a little bit. And Donald, I'll come to you first. What's your lead item? What's the most important thing you want to talk about in terms of what went wrong for Duke to result in this loss?
Jason, I'm going to go to this one, and I'm pretty sure you'll have frustrations over this as well, because it's your favorite stat, field goals attempted.
I knew it.
And
yep.
Duke had 55, which is, a fair amount. Florida State had 73. So they had 18 more field goal attempts on the game. Remember, we only lost by 1. Why was this discrepancy in place? 2 things: offensive rebounds and turnovers. I'll go with offensive rebounding because there was points where Florida State got 3 or 4 or even 5 chances on a possession at a basket. And at a certain point, your guys just get tired. But It's about positioning. They did not have great positioning on some of these rebounds because Florida State, it wasn't like Florida State was jumping 16 feet in the air to grab them over Mark Williams and Paolo Banchero and other guys. They just had better footwork. They had better positioning, and they were able to get, again, second, third, fourth, fifth chances at the basket. And at a certain point, they're just going to go in. There was one possession I remember where they probably got 5 offensive rebounds on one possession and then finally got the shot and the foul, and they were able to go to the free throw line for a chance at a 3-point play. Those are so frustrating as a fan. I know they're frustrating as a player, but they're also just kicks in the gut, because after a possession where you're like, hey, we've played great defense, we've gotten the jack up stupid shots, they still got points out of it. And I think that is where Duke, those little things are what cost you basketball games. Again, they attempted 18 more field goals than we did, and we only lost by 1. Imagine if we cut that in half. That means that there's some of those baskets that aren't going in, and we're walking out there with an easy win.
So you're going to find this very interesting. I kind of disagree with you, and I'm going to explain. Everyone's going to talk about their offensive rebounding. I don't think that was the biggest factor. I think that a lot of those came on just a couple of possessions, like you identified. On the first and third possessions of the second half, they had 4 and then 5 offensive rebounds. That's 9 offensive rebounds on 2 possessions. That skews the stats in a really big way. I'm not saying they didn't kill us on the boards on the offensive rebounding. They did, but I'm not sure that was as big a factor as the turnovers. And allow me to explain it this way. They only outscored us 12-8 on second point chances. That to me is not why we lost. We lost because of the turnovers. Because when you get like I said, they had 9 offensive rebounds on 2 possessions. But that's only 2 possessions. With turnovers, you don't get multiple turnovers on a possession the way you can with an offensive rebound. You know, once you turn the ball over, the possession's done.
We definitely tried. On an inbounds pass. We gave it to him, got it right back, and almost gave it right back to him.
Right, I know. Joey Baker, yes. They beat us in the turnover margin 15-5. That's 10 extra possessions that Florida State got. Like you said, they took 18 more shots than us, and a lot of those were because of the multiple offensive rebounds on one possession. But even if you take out those multiple offensive rebounds, the turnovers to me are why Florida State got so many more shots than Duke. And as a result, Florida State outscores Duke on points off turnover by 14-7. They beat us on points off turnover. So I think that's a bigger factor than second chance points. And I want to point something out. Turnovers are such a key mark of whether this Duke team is really executing properly. On the season, the number to watch out for is 12. If Duke commits more than 12 turnovers, they are 1-2. And the one game they won where they committed more than 12 turnovers was South Carolina State. It was a crazy game. Duke won it by like almost 40. We were up 30 points at halftime. I don't think the same kind of attention was being paid to the way the game was being played in that contest. That's, no offense to South Carolina State, but that wasn't a real contest for Duke. So in games against teams where it was legitimately, the outcome was somewhat in doubt, Duke committed 15 turnovers against Florida State, 17 turnovers against Miami. In games where Duke commits 12 turnovers or less, we are 13-1. The only time we committed less than 12 turnovers and lost was the game against Ohio State. Duke has been, if Duke takes care of the ball, Duke wins. It is as simple as that. And I think, to me, that's the biggest problem that Duke had in this game, was that we didn't take care of the ball, not those rebounds. And again, the rebounds were bad, but the turnovers were bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a fair shot. Like I said, I think those are the two, in my mind, were two of the biggest determining factors. But I'll even dive a little further. We didn't take the ball away from them either. You mentioned they only had 5. We only had caused 5 turnovers, 2 steals, which is the second lowest of the season. We, I guess, tied with the Miami game of only having 2 steals, and a team that normally averages 10 steals. Remember, our momentum, they've talked about this all year. Our momentum comes through our transition. It comes from taking the ball away on defense and transitioning into offense where we can get easy points, or have it where the other team is flustered and setting up their defense so they're not set. it goes into that last play, which I'm sure we'll talk about as well. The fact is, we looked panic in our half court offense at times in the second half because we did not have that momentum. We did not have that flow. We did not have that energy. We didn't have the momentum of grabbing the ball from them and going down and stuffing it down their throat, which we love doing to teams. So I think that all contributed. I think you're right. And also, again, there was no transitional getting a rebound and going out and running quickly and setting up a quick offense where the other team doesn't have time to adjust. So those were little things that made this game so frustrating, because credit to Florida State, they did a lot of things very well, but also for us, it coincided with us not doing the things that got us here. We didn't take care of the basketball. We didn't, on the other side, we didn't do much on defense to take the ball away from them or to limit the number of shots that they were able to have on possessions. And those are little things that, again, you look at those categories that we've just talked about, all of them are skewed in favor of Florida State, and Florida State only won by one. I stress that, like, we are not in a situation of burn it all down and start over. We're in a situation of, this was such a frustrating game because all these categories, we just lopped one or two things off of the top. We're walking out of Tallahassee with a victory. That's what's so frustrating about it.
Yeah. And by the way, I mean, like, I don't feel like we deserve to win. as close as
we deserve to win.
Yeah, they outplayed us. I mean, one of the things I had in the bad, and I was going to wait a little bit to get to this because it's not really bad, but I wanted to give full credit to Florida State. They played inspired basketball. They hustled. They fought. They were gutsy. Coach K said in the postgame it was just two teams playing their hearts out, and he said they knocked us back. And I want to note for people, that's the first time all year that he's used those words. They knocked us back. And last year, like, every press conference was Coach K saying they knocked us back. So again, full credit to Florida State for playing that way. Coach K said it was the most physical game we played all year. And I talked about the fact that Florida State was gutsy. Caleb Mills, I want to recognize this guy. He's 0 for 4 from 3 in regulation. Hadn't hit a three-pointer the entire regulation. Comes out in overtime, first possession, immediately takes a three, buries it. And then in the final seconds, with Florida State down, he took another three and buried it. This guy's 0 for 4 in regulation from three-point range, hits 2 for 2 in overtime, one at the beginning and one at the end. And, we talked about Raekwon Evans' shot to tie the game. John Butler had far and away the best game of his career. He scored more points.
I hated hearing his name. Yeah. I hated hearing John Butler's name, and we heard it way too many times last night.
He scored more points and took more shots in this game than any game in his career. In fact, he had more shots and more points in this game than his previous 4 games combined. I mean, think about that. You take what he's done the previous 4 games, and he was better than that in this one game. And I'm not even mentioning the block shot he had at the end on Wendell Moore. Again, I want to give absolute full credit to Florida State for playing super hard, and they deserved to win. The fact that Duke was in it, the fact that Duke had leads late, the fact that we were in position to win this game is a miracle considering how well Florida State played.
Jason, I think we've reached the portion of the bad where we have to talk about, I think, two important things that stood out from this game. And I'm going to let you pick which one we talk about. It is whether we went 15 minutes in the second half without Paolo attempting a shot, or the final play of regulation where, with a timeout in hand, Wendell Moore kind of goes the length of the floor and it attempts a shot that was blocked. So I leave it to you. Which one do you want to discuss first? Because we got to touch on both.
Yeah. So I tell you what. Let me start with the Paolo stuff, because without that, I don't think Wendell Moore's attempt at the end matters. It doesn't happen. Duke did an incredibly poor job of, when we were in our half court offense, we just didn't execute well at all. In the first 9 minutes of the second half, Duke was 1 of 12 from the field. And honestly, as I look back on it, there weren't a lot of good shots in there. Like, it wasn't like, that was a good possession. We worked and got the right shot and we just didn't make it. It was a lot of guys taking shots. I was like, as soon as he took it, I was like, that's just not a good shot. And our inability to find Paolo Banchero, whether it's in the post or on the perimeter, was a huge deciding factor in this game. I kind of can't believe that we went 15 minutes without him taking a shot. It's unbelievable. And when you saw the way he took over in the final 5 minutes, it's unconscionable that happened. And, we're not going to play the sound. I asked Coach K in the post-game press conference.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, I asked Coach K, I was like, hey, what happened? Why didn't Paolo get a shot for 15 minutes in the second half? And Coach K's answer to me was, he said, I've coached 1,500 games in my career. I think I know when our best player isn't getting touches, which is, I could tell he was kind of pissed off at me for asking the question. He did not like my question, but he didn't really answer it. I'm not sure there is an answer for why Paolo didn't. I think Duke should have tried to maybe bring him out to the perimeter a little bit more. I know part of the answer was Florida State was playing very good, very physical defense on him. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. When we get done with these shots, I want to talk about the physicality of the game. But Duke needs to learn from this. We cannot go 15, it's like unbelievable. I'm saying the words and I'm not even, we cannot go 15 minutes with our future top lottery pick, arguably the best player in the country, not getting any shots. And it's not like it was because they were double and triple teaming him and he was distributing the balls to other guys. Paolo didn't have any assists during that time either. It was really frustrating to watch. And as it was going longer and longer, I kept on thinking, well, they've got to just get to a possession where they just go, you know what, no one else, it's got to be Paolo. And we never did until 5 minutes were left and we were down 9 points and we were desperate. And the results were incredible, which makes the previous 15 minutes all the more frustrating.
Yeah, honestly, I think in the first few minutes of the second half, Paolo was off the ball. He didn't have the ball on the perimeter, as you mentioned, that he did in the last 5 minutes, where he would either come up with the ball or receive the ball very early on and be able to create from the wing or from the top of the key. A lot of times he was going down into the post, and because a lot of times he's very effective there. But at the same time, we were not effective in getting the ball into the post. We weren't all game. There was a lot of times where we just could not feed the post, except if, Paolo was having the ball or Wendell had the ball and was able to get over the defense. Because as we talked about, Florida State is a very tall team. They had, 3 or 4 7-footers out there at times. So the problem was we weren't able to get him the ball. And at a certain point, we just kept working around the perimeter and we weren't able to put Paolo in a position where he could receive one of those passes and then go to create. I think the only shot attempt technically that he had in the first 15 minutes of the second half, he was fouled. So it doesn't count as a shot attempt. And he went to the free throw line. But he has to be more involved in the offense. And if something's not working, then they need to identify that and go, hey, we're not getting the ball to you on the post. Come out to the wing so I can give you the ball, and then you can create from there. Because I think a lot of times we were not able to do that. And Paolo was able to score from anywhere on the floor. So you're right. It is kind of unconscionable that we were not able to find the best scorer on the floor.
So, and then, we can next transition to the final play. I'll be honest with you. I didn't, in my notes, I sort everything. I put stuff in the good. I put stuff in the bad. I have notes of what I want to talk about. We don't do this all extemporaneously. But I didn't have the final play in my quote unquote bad section. It was what it was. I would have preferred that we make a pass on that final play. What happened was Wendell got the ball on in the backcourt and then never gave it up. Yes, the clock was counting down, but there was 12 seconds left. And I think there was probably time for us to make at least one pass. I would have liked for Paolo to touch the ball. No question about that. But I don't have a huge problem with Wendell doing what he did. And Coach K in the post-game press conference said he was fine with Wendell or Paolo taking the ball on that final possession. It was pretty clear he wanted it to be one of those two guys. And I don't know how you can say it should be anyone but one of those two guys. Other than them creating for someone else, but they should be the initiators. Wendell has struggled of late, and I don't, I didn't love him. Like I said, not passing the ball. I don't love him taking the ball against a guy who's 7 feet tall and really long. Wendell, I think, is used to playing against guys who are smaller than him. And this game, we talked in the pregame, in the preview about how big Florida State's the biggest team in the country, and we talked about that in our preview. And Wendell had to adjust to the fact that he was being guarded at times by guys who were a half foot taller than him, and that was the case in this last possession. And it resulted in his shot getting blocked. But I don't have a huge problem with him trying to create that. And Coach K said, our guys are told in those situations, go downhill, go toward the basket. Maybe you make a basket, maybe you get fouled, but you give yourself more chances than taking a jumper. And so I think Wendell was doing the right thing. And the reality is, and Don, I'll let you jump in, Duke has now lost 2 games on last possession kind of plays. 2 games where there were moments in the final minute. I'm not even talking about the overtime, but there are moments in the final minute where Duke was favored, like a decisive favorite to win the game. We had the lead and it looked like we were probably going to win, and we lost to Miami and we lost to Florida State on some late game heroics by those teams. These are toss-up kind of games, 50-50 kind of games. And I would rather take those 50-50 losses now versus later in the season. So I don't like it. I wish it didn't happen, but I can live with it.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the final play, it's more indicative of my concern about end of half /game /overtime execution. Because if you remember, we had a chance to, get a basket at the end of the first half, and it turned into a steal. We had a very terrible possession and it ended up with Florida State stealing. And they actually, they hit the basket, but it was after the buzzer sounded. They hit the long, half court shot. And so if it's a split second earlier,
that was 3/4 court, man. That was a long shot.
If it was a split second earlier, that's 3+ points, right? At the end of the game, we didn't really have a play except throw it long and hope that they call the foul, which, to be honest, Wendell did get just murdered in that last play of regulation. Then in overtime, we had the play where, yes, there was an option for him to shoot, but there was also Mark Williams underneath who had been catching lobs all game, and he would have been open, and he was actually open on that play. So I think for me, it's more indicative of just the end of half execution and how poor it has been in the last few games. Again, we talked about it against Miami. We talked about it against NC State at the end of the first half. They had a play that got botched as well. They have to work on that execution because, again, we've had some of these 50-50 games, and end of game execution is key because, yes, I'll take these losses in January, but I also don't want them to relive this in March or April because I want them to learn from this and be able to execute better next time.
So my last bad thing is going to be fouls. Coming into this game, Duke was the 16th best team in the country at committing fouls. We only committed 13.8 fouls per game. That's an amazing number. In this game, we were whistled for 19 fouls, 6 more than our average. And I know it was an overtime game and that adds 5 minutes, but this was still a bit of an outlier in terms of Duke's fouls committed. Florida State, as a result of that, made more free throws, 20 free throws made than Duke attempted. We only attempted 18. That is something that hasn't even come close to happening, at all this year. Again, they made more than we attempted from the free throw line. And that leads me to the refs. And I want to be really clear. I am not blaming the officials for this loss. Duke needs to figure out how the game is being called and adjust to it. But I can still call out the refs for doing a poor job. Florida State was incredibly physical. The refs allowed them to do as they wished, especially on defense. If you have the game on tape, go back and watch some of the second half. See how they leaned on Paolo, how they held him to prevent him from getting post position. Duke had trouble getting into offensive motion because our guys were being held and bumped and leaned on every time they tried to move. Early in the second half, the refs made several just mysterious calls. They called a traveling on Paolo where he never had. It was just bizarre. And that seemed to frustrate our guys and get us out of rhythm. And again, I'm not blaming the refs, but they allowed Florida State to turn this into a wrestling match on defense. And that's not how basketball is supposed to be played. And it's unfortunate. But Duke needs to find a way to adjust to that and fight through it, because there will be other games like that this year.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to fight through those or just recognize it and learn how to turn it into your advantage. Florida State used that to go to the line 25 times. They made 20 of 25. We were 14 of 18 from the line, which is great. But again, in a game where you're talking about 1 or 2 points here and there, 1 or 2 moments here and there, 1 or 2 plays here and there, those trips to the free throw line are exactly why we talk about all year. You got to go force your way to the line and knock down your free throws, because those could be the difference between a win and a loss.
Yep. And we've talked a lot about what Duke needs to learn from this game. Our first chance to put those lessons into action will be this weekend against Syracuse, a preview of what to expect from Jimmy Boeheim and his boys coming up after the break. We're back, and it's time to look ahead. This weekend, Duke plays Syracuse. We're back in Durham for that contest. And it's the Fighting Boeheims coming to town. It's Jimmy Boeheim, his son, Buddy, and his other son, Jimmy, as well as several other players that you'll be familiar with. Donald, tell me, Syracuse is not having the year they expected to have thus far, or have they?
No, they haven't. They are right now hovering around 500 for the season, 9-9. They are 3-4 in the ACC, currently sitting in 9th place. Again, when we talk about Syracuse, we talk about how they're always projected to be in the top half of the conference. They always end up to be hovering right in the middle of the pack, which is exactly where they are right now. I will say they do have a couple of key wins. They have beaten Florida State. They have beaten Indiana, and they did win last night against Clemson. So there's your top 100 KenPom wins that they've had. Losses, though, they have spread across the board. They have lost to FSU. Again, we talked about this before the FSU game, but they've played Syracuse. Syracuse and Florida State have played each other twice. So that's a nice kind of barometer for us to kind of look at with researching this team. But I mean, some losses that they had are very good, to Auburn, Villanova, Miami, but they've also lost to teams like Colgate and Georgetown, who are not, they're hovering right around the middle of D1 with regards to KenPom. So I think when it comes to Syracuse, you kind of don't know what you're going to get on a nightly basis. And we'll explain about ways to beat Syracuse, because as we know, they are the keepers of the matchup zone. And we'll talk about how to break up that zone in just a minute.
Yeah, so let me get to the advanced metrics first. Syracuse is number 74 in KenPom. Not great, not terrible, but not great. This is the crazy thing. They are 15th on offense. We're talking a top 15 offense in the country. They are 228th on defense. Wow. They are really bad on defense. So let's start with the offense. This is a great three-point shooting team. 38% on threes, 20th best three-point shooting team in the country. They do a really good job holding onto the ball, not committing turnovers. They're, not great, but they're fairly good on offensive rebounding. They play 4 shooters around 1 big man, and that big man's only job is to try and grab some offensive rebounds. And this is a team that's just going to shoot a ton of threes on you. Buddy Boeheim, Joe Girard, and Cole Swider are each going to take more than 6 3-pointers in this game. They average more than 6 3-pointers a game, all 3 of them. They bomb away from the perimeter, and that's just sort of Syracuse's style. So now let's talk about the defense. Like I said, 228th on defense. They literally don't do anything good on defense. They block. They're okay at blocking shots, but everything else is just horrible on defense. And there are a couple of things that stand out. I was like, wait, I had to double check it. I couldn't believe it. Syracuse is last in the country. Last, 358th at assist percentage. And by that, I mean the number of times a field goal scored against them is assisted. Almost 70% of the time of the field goals scored against Syracuse are off of assists. They're also last at the frequency that teams take 3-pointers against them. More than 50% of the shots attempted against Syracuse are 3-pointers. This is a function of them playing that funky matchup zone. The way to beat it is to pass around it and pass through it. And, they do a decent job. I mean, opponents hit about 34% of their threes, which, it's okay. It's not a great, but opponents shoot an incredible number of 3-pointers against them. And Donald, why don't you, this is the perfect moment. You got to talk about it now. You got to pass to beat this. There's no way to beat this Florida State defense going one-on-one, because you're not going one-on-one. You're going 1-on-5 against the zone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I honestly love when we play Syracuse, because I love the matchup zone, because I used to play this in high school, and when employed correctly, it can be very, very frustrating for an offense to go up against that kind of defense. But the problem is Syracuse over the years has not played it as well as they used to back in the heydays of, the 80s and 90s when this was more of a novel thing. Now you'll see guys, I mean, Duke even plays a matchup zone from time to time, as we saw just last night against Florida State. But as you mentioned, Jason, there are two things that you can do to get over this matchup zone. The first thing is to shoot over it. And that's what they're wanting you to do. That's why a lot of teams just end up taking half of their shots as 3-pointers, because that's what the zone is going to allow you to do. Shoot. And if you have guys that get hot, like we did in the first half last night against Florida State, if you have guys that get hot, that's going to put pressure on that matchup zone. It's going to stretch them out just a little bit more. That leads to the second way to do it, and that's passing through angles to find an open lane and find the holes in the defense. There are two, I call them choke points. There are two choke points that are really essential, especially in this 2-3 zone. The first one, and the main one, is right at the free throw line, because that's where you have two guards that are just hovering there waiting for you to pass and go through. Now, if a lot of guys, what they'll do is they'll drive right at that choke point, make those guys collapse on you, and that allows two guys to be open. So then you can find an open passing lane. The second choke point is actually along the baseline. So if you can work the ball away around and get underneath the zone, there's a lot of times where, because if you have three guys that can shoot from beyond the arc, that 2-3 zone becomes more of a 3-2, where you'll have one guy from the bottom just kind of glance his way up towards the wing, and that opens up something underneath. So if you can get a guy like Wendell Moore or Paolo Banchero right there in that baseline, about 10 feet from the basket, that opens up a passing lane, it opens up a driving lane, and it opens up a shooting hole. And every single time, if you see Syracuse and when they perform poorly, it's because people find those choke points and exploit them time to time. And it couples with some people getting hot from 3-point. You don't have to have the whole team, but just enough where everyone is like, hey, we have to just stretch this defense out just a little bit more, because the more you stretch out a zone, the more holes there are to exploit, and the more the choke points kind of fail. So that's what I want to see Duke do. A lot of ball movement, a lot of distribution, trying to find the open man on the wing. Obviously, knocking down open shots will help, but at a certain time, you'll see guys like Wendell Moore, Paolo Banchero, or even Jeremy Roach or guys like that from the perimeter drive right at that free throw line, because those guys are either going to collapse or you're going to just be knocking down free throws for the entirety of the match.
Yeah, so there are a couple of personnel things about Duke that I want to mention. Not a good time to be missing Trevor Keels. We don't know for sure that he'll be missing. Like I said, we're unsure how long this calf injury will affect him. But if he doesn't play, this feels like the kind of game that is ready-made for him in terms of being open on the wing to take 3-pointers, which is something that Syracuse gives up to teams. They don't mind giving that up to teams, and Keels feels like the kind of guy who could take advantage of that. I think AJ Griffin is going to find. AJ Griffin loves to shoot that corner 3. That's it's
and that's going to be open.
It's partially a function of where he plays on the floor. AJ's not going to be up top all that much, but that corner 3 is his shot, and I think he's going to get a lot of them in this game. Joey Baker is the other guy who likes the corner 3, and I think we could see a fair bit of, especially if Trevor Keels is out, we could see a fair bit of Joey Baker getting corner 3s in this game. The other personnel thing I wanted to mention really quick, we said Paolo almost had a triple-double against Florida State. I think there's a possibility that he will have that kind of opportunity again against Syracuse. I can almost guarantee you, it does not take a genius to say Duke is going to try to attack the matchup zone by getting the ball to the high post, the free throw line. You talked about that. Anyone who's seen teams play Syracuse know that's the place you try and get the ball to begin to cover up the zone. We're going to get it to Paolo there. That's going to be Duke's plan. And he has shown himself, especially lately, to be a heck of a passer. Paolo's been putting up big assist numbers in several recent games. His ability to get the ball at that foul line and decide, am I going to take a little foul line jumper? Am I going to maybe put it on the floor and try and attack the guys on the back line? Or am I going to pass to what could be guys open on the wings? If James Edwards steps up onto Paolo, there could be someone, Mark Williams could be open down in the post. Sorry, I said James, I mean Jesse Edwards. James Edwards played for Detroit, right?
The Buddha.
Yeah. As Jesse Edwards, the Syracuse big man, steps up onto Paolo, Mark Williams will be available down low. I think Duke's whole game is going to come down to what Paolo is able to do with the ball when we get it to him in the high post. So, if Duke goes, if Paolo has another game where he goes 10 minutes without getting an assist or a shot, Duke's going to be in trouble.
Yeah, I also think in two ways this also helped too, because you mentioned the triple-double, like for him, is going to involve rebounds as well. And on the offensive glass, when someone is shooting, it's not like man-to-man where there's a guy who's just going to turn around and put a body on you. They're operating zones. So what that means is whoever is on the other wings or the other corner needs to slash to the basket whenever a shot goes up, because they're going to have open range to maybe run at it, not necessarily tip dunk it, but at least get that ball and get a second chance at a play. And another thing, you were talking about personnel. I'm not saying he's going to play like 10 minutes or anything like that, but would not be surprised to see a little bit more of Bates Jones in this game, because like you mentioned, he is another guy who loves to shoot from the corners, and those corner shots are going to be very, very open if you perform well against the matchup zone.
And remember, I'm not sure if you recall this, like a month ago, there was a game where Bates Jones played a bit, and I said at that time, I was like, you know what? And he was able to get the ball at that foul line and be a great passer, a great distributor from there. And I said, we could, I don't know how much Bates Jones plays in most games, but against Syracuse, that could be the game where we see Bates Jones a lot. His passing ability is really great from that high post. And I'll add a wrinkle to this, and then we can wrap it up. I think this is a game where Mark Williams doesn't factor a lot and doesn't play a ton. It's not Mark's fault, but when Syracuse is on offense, look, the big thing Mark brings to Duke is that rim protection. Syracuse doesn't attack the rim. That's just not in their game plan. They're working the ball around the perimeter, and they're trying to get three-pointers. They're trying to get open jump shots for their jump shooters. They've got 4, like I said, they surround Jesse Edwards, who's not making post moves. He's just rebounding. They're surrounding Jesse Edwards with 4 perimeter players who are not this is not Florida State and Miami taking the ball to the basket. This is a team that wants to shoot jump shots. And Mark Williams is going to be of limited value against a team like that. I think we could see Mark playing a little bit less and some of those minutes going to Bates Jones. That's a great call, Donald.
Yeah, and I also think Mark Williams, there is a spot for him on the offense, because again, one of those choke points, as I mentioned, is on that baseline. Yeah. It's not necessarily his realm of operation normally, but if he can pull himself out of there, maybe he draws yet another defender closer to him. And just a step one way creates so much space on the other side that someone else can slash in or someone else can shoot over. I think those are really, really interesting things. And I'll be curious to see how he is involved and how they try to get him involved, especially with passovers. And again, Bates Jones, either in the corner or at the top of the key, taller guys who are able to pass the ball are going to be a very, very effective tool against Syracuse, because passing over zone is going to create so many problems for them.
So that's going to wrap it up for us here on this episode of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. We are sorry Sam could not join us. He's in mourning because of the Duke loss last night.
But he did mention, we forgot to say this during the Florida State recap, but he did want to give a shout out to Leonard Hamilton for wearing a mask. We all support Leonard Hamilton and everything he does, especially last night wearing the mask. And I will say, them announcing a donation to the Emily K Center as part of the Coach K retirement tour, I thought was a very, very classy move. Far be it from a Miami alum to show any grace towards Florida State, but I want to give them credit there where credit is due. Yes, we love the Ham Man. He's a favorite here on the DBR podcast as much as any rival coach can be. Like I said, Absolutely. That's going to wrap it up for us. He is Donald. I am Jason. We ask you, as always, send us email. Wow, the email box, to say that it has exploded is an understatement. Email box going crazy these days. dbrpodcast@gmail.com. We will be back after the Syracuse game. Hopefully Trevor Keels will be back, and we will wrap it up all for you on this weekend. Until then, here's the Duke Band to play us out and take us home.